Hello, my name is 𝗣𝗢𝗡𝗦. Welcome to the Engineering Productivity Tools Meetup. I've been interested in engineering productivity for decades. And so 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗟𝗦 and I, a couple of years ago, created this Engineering Productivity Tools Meetup to learn more about these engineering tools that are out there and try to provide a showcase for some of these tools so that others could learn about them as well. People. I want to thank those Engineering Productivity Tools members who are attending tonight, as well as those who view the recording of this presentation on our Engineering Productivity Tools YouTube channel. We meet once a quarter, always on the second Thursday of the second month of every quarter, like tonight. We meet at 6 p.m. and go for about an hour and a half. We have a presenter tonight who I'm sure will hold your interest. But first, what I'd like to do is briefly recap the past 3 Engineering Productivity Tools meetups to give you a sampling of what kinds of things we've talked about in the past. So on August 10th, 2023, we had the CTO from Laneige come in and talk to us about their products, which provides a software bill of materials and basically the provenance of all this open source code, as well as other code in your products. They work with you to determine that. They have some very smart systems, which know current state of, I want to say all the open source in the world. They're working at doing that and provide reports to you and to others about that tool, your tools and software. This is very important because software, open source software can be, this is very important because there's much concern about open source software, especially among certain organizations like the federal government, who's recently put a requirement out that any company dealing contractually with the government with software has to provide a software bill of materials for their products. So that's a tool to keep your eye on, especially if you're using open source. The next one was 𝗣𝗢𝗟𝗓𝗜𝗓, and we had Shania Levin come in on November 9th, 2023, to tell us about their tool, 𝗣𝗢𝗟𝗓𝗜𝗓, which helps to provide ways to understand your code better and to debug it more easily. She gave a great demonstration of it, and I was quite impressed by what I saw. However, in early February, I got an announcement that it was closing its doors and shutting down all commercial operations. I called and talked to her, and she was trying to take and raise additional funds, perhaps through some of her current investors, but she never got back to me about what was happening until yesterday when we received an email that 𝗣𝗢𝗟𝗓𝗜𝗓 had been acquired and is now part of 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗟𝗏𝗦, which appears to be a DevX platform. It's not one of the ones we're going to discuss tonight, but I'm going to be looking into it, and maybe there'll be a future presenter at one of our meetups. So on February 8th, we had Larry Edelstein from Perforce, and Perforce is well known for their source code control system, Perforce. But Larry came in and told us not only about that, but about many of the other tools they have, including static code analysis, DevOps tools, really quite a large portfolio of software. I was surprised at the depth and breadth of the tools they have. So if you're looking for tools, Perforce is a company that you should look into if you want to improve your productivity. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn the time over to Dr. Krishna Kumar and today's topic, which is all about software productivity. Krishna, take it away.
talk today, it is likely that you're here because of the interest in developer productivity in the economy. And there's a pattern that I've noticed, at least, that whenever the interest in developer productivity spikes, it's because there's an economic crisis somewhere. Back in 2001, it was precipitated by the dot-com boom starting in 1998. Where a whole bunch of people were hired, and then when the cycle turned, they had a bunch of layoffs, and people were sort of replaced or outsourced to other countries. And the solution then was, okay, well, we'll cut down the number of developers, and we'll do something else to sort of take up the slack if necessary. And the same thing is happening right now. There's mass layoffs due to a huge boom in the last 10 years. And the latest magic bullet for this is AI. And if you think about, what happened in 1998 versus what happened in 2004, a lot of the drivers are still the same. A lot of the lack of understanding of productivity is the same. A lot of the objections for why we should not measure productivity is also the same, right? Back in 2003, Martin Fowler had a great article called "Cannot Measure Productivity," which is, I still recommend everybody who's interested in this topic read it, because all his objections are still valid today. All his reasons why he said it was impossible are still valid today, but clearly people don't think it's impossible anymore, and they're doing something about productivity, which you can see in the huge interest in sort of frameworks, tools, the work in big tech productivity labs. So it's not as clear cut as it was made out to be in 2003, but it is a controversial, sort of difficult topic. And when you actually look at the market to understand, okay, well, how do I sort of approach this in my company? It can be a very, very confusing market, right? There are many frameworks that seem to be talking about productivity, which are not necessarily about productivity. There are many approaches to actually collecting data to do this and measurement tools to do this. A whole bunch of them are based on using system logs with tools like Git and Jira. There's a whole school of thought that says all that stuff is nonsense. You should just talk to developers and run developer surveys. If you go to G2 Cloud, understand the products out there, you'll see a huge plethora of tools out there. So part of the talk today is about, okay, well, what do all these tools mean? What do they solve? How do you distinguish between them? And how do you sort of make some sense and put some structure into this marketplace? That's really what I'm going to focus on in this talk. Since I'm covering the market landscape of tools in this space, it's worthwhile looking at what some of the leading analysts in the space have already done. And Gartner has a fairly comprehensive set of papers, and they have analysts covering this and so on and so forth. And if you look at the market landscape of the general software development, productivity, data measurement tools, they look at it as three chunks. What they call the DevOps platforms, which are the transactional systems that, tools that developers use every day, the GitHubs, the GitLabs, Atlassian, Azure DevOps, and so on and so forth. Then they have a category called engineering intelligence platforms, which is really where we'll focus a lot of our time today on, which is really focused on tools that are focused on extracting data from these platforms, focusing on software delivery and developer productivity. These are what we call the systems log-based tools, right? And then there's another category called value stream management platforms. This is a tool that is only indirectly related to developer productivity. It's much more around how do you connect business, how do you connect delivery of technical outcomes, technical outputs to business outcomes, and how do you focus on end-to-end delivery from idea to impact, right? So you can think of this as sort of expanding the scope beyond engineering, right? And these are all related, and so we should, and this is actually decent framing to understand kind of the scope of what we've been talking about. We will focus on these two, obviously, because these are more about data, measurement, and analytics, and look at the differences between those two. If you look at the engineering intelligence market, this is the one that Mickey, you sent to me, the G2 market. You can see there's a ton of products out there, right? And what do these things do? What's the difference? What use cases do you need them for, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to do a buyer's guide, but I'll give you my perspective of how these products fit in an overall landscape, okay? About me, I'm a software engineer. I've been working in this particular space since 2015. I have been working in the software industry since the early 90s. And I've actually built applications across the entire software intelligence and VSM categories. I've tried to bring a products to market in the space, which I thought were great ideas, and have failed utterly. So take what I say with a grain of salt. Clearly, I haven't been been able to actually crack the market. And I'm actually preparing for run 4 with a new set of ideas. So I'm actually in love with the problem. I haven't figured out how to solve it yet. So I actually, part of my thing is going to be about just appreciating all those guys and men and women who actually been successful at bringing some good products to the market. They certainly have much better taste in problems to fall in love with. And again, everything I'm saying here is personal opinion. I've been a market observer, market participant. I've followed my opinions about what people do, and this is completely subjective. I'm not endorsing anything. There's no rejections. Well, maybe some things are rejections. I don't know. But if you're looking for a product, just consider this as background. Okay. All right, so what we'll do is we'll look at the landscape, right? And we look at the landscape of these products on a timeline starting from around 2015, because this is when this particular market really became nascent. And we look at this with these two sort of software engineering focus and then with the value stream focus, right? The engineering intelligence platforms really were the first kind of non-trivial products to actually get into the space beyond kind of just reporting from work tracking tools. And a lot of the value stream products are picked up, as a combination of these two things, right? I'll walk through the timeline of kind of the key, what I call the key use cases. Now, which problems were people trying to solve? What are the first companies that actually solved it? There's much more products than, you saw the list. There's 35, 40 products. People are coming in and going out of business every other week. So it's a very, very high churn market, right? These are the people who have survived, who create a good use case, build companies around those. I'm not endorsing them. They're not necessarily the best ones in any category, but they were the first from what I know. And so I think they kind of define the category. So that's why I'm going to sort of pick those somewhat at random and say, okay, well, that's a use case, that's a use case, that's a use case. And you put them all together, you get something called software engineering intelligence, right? Okay. So the first use case, the first product, from the SEI platforms, the first one is a product called GitPrime. You might have heard of it. It's actually one of the earliest products. It created the product SEI product category, and the use case that was new there was technical visibility for engineering managers into Git repository histories, right? So all of us have been engineering managers who have always done some Git sleuthing to figure out what people are doing. They just made a product out of it and did it usefully, right? They were mostly reporting for managers, several innovations, a product called the work log that can organize Git commit history into kind of work-related stuff, metric called active days. And I'm not going to get too deep into that, but they also had many bizarre snake oil metrics, terrible metrics, right? And things like, I can tell you how much impact you had by looking at the lines of code you wrote and whether you changed code and so on and so forth, right? Remember, this is the days of story points. People could make up metrics and people would buy it, right? So there was no rigor to any of that, right? And so there's this snake oil metrics are kind of the thing that really sort of turned a lot of people off of that first product, but it's loved by managers, hated by engineers for the most part, right? And there's a large market presence because they were first to market. They had the market to themselves for 2 or 3 years. And everybody who competed with them had to reproduce some of their functionality. So that DNA is in every other competitor's product in this market, right? So for me, my first screen at this point is when I look at a large number of competitors, the first thing I look at is, okay, well, are they still implementing these metrics? And if I see those snake oil metrics, that's an automatic filter for anybody new because they should know better, right? It's fairly easy screen to get rid of a lot of players in the market. There are still a lot of players in the market who implement this stuff, right? And because of this, the snake oil reputation for this category has never quite left. A lot of people distrust this whole category because of that, right? They did a lot of great stuff, but I also think that, because they sort of botched that intro, it's also set this field apart by quite a bit, right? Okay, so if you look at from 2015 or so, this is the only, these kind of sort of non-rigorous metrics were the first things you started with. And you ended up with, in 2018 was when Accelerate came out. And that kind of changed the whole game for pretty much everybody in this space. Accelerate was the first set of rigorous, empirically researched methods to identify real technical practices. And the Dora organization that backed it up, right? including both cultural factors and technical practices that characterize high-performance software delivery. So if you want to look and say, okay, what is a high-performance software, high-productive software delivery, they have the list. It's a book, just read it. You know, it has all the background foundations you need to understand what you need to do to improve. They don't talk much about measurements. The only measurements they gave were DORA metrics, and we'll talk about that in a second, right? But they also broadly expose social science inquiry techniques into the software industry, right? DORA metrics, if you don't know of them, I won't bother explaining them. It's actually somewhat more deeper than we can get into in this call. But this is something that is, if you're in the software industry and you haven't read Accelerate, then you should go read it, right? It's actually the first time metrics were acceptable to engineers because they made sense, right? Unfortunately, they also introduced what we call the quote-unquote DORA benchmarks. They decided to sort of categorize these metrics into elite, high, medium, and low performers. It was not ever intended to be a benchmark. The DORA people never did, but it was treated as a benchmark. And pretty soon, the only thing that was left from Accelerate was DORA metrics and benchmarks, and everyone trying to do the measurements and try to make people elite, people who are low performers into medium performers, without actually figuring out what the work needed to do that is. So this is why we can't have good things in our industry, right? So this DORA metrics were DORA benchmarks. I'll put benchmarks here. Were probably the only downside of everything great that came out of Accelerate, right? The idea here was, we were really measuring sort of the efficiency of software delivery, more or less from the standpoint of continuous delivery of code from sort of engineering to production, right? That was the scope of what really sort of the DORA metrics covered. But then DORA as a whole covered cultural factors, technical practices. How do you actually make all that work? It's not just a pipeline; it's everything upstream from there to actually make it work, right?
Krishna, before we go on, now everybody understands that was a book. It really wasn't a product, right?
It wasn't a product. Accelerate is a book. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry. I'll be mixing books and products here. Sorry. I'll make sure if in most cases, these movements are triggered by a book coming out. There's a correlation between a book coming out and people building software for it. And that's definitely true of this industry, this section in general. So yeah, this is a book. Yeah, absolutely. There's a book, and there's a research organization called DORA.dev, if you're not familiar with it. It's a fantastic resource, huge compendium of everything that we've learned in engineering for the last 30 years.
Isn't that sponsored by Google Research?
It is currently sponsored by Google Research. It's part of Google right now. Yeah, but it used to be an independent research organization. And so the first use case that came out of this is, okay, well, now we have DORA metrics, we need to measure them. It actually turns out that actually measuring these DORA metrics on the ground is actually more difficult than you think. And so there's a whole category of products that came out. It's okay, well, everyone's asking us to measure DORA metrics. Let's figure out how to do it. And the first product that had a good sort of practical way of approximating all 4 DORA metrics was this product called Code Climate Velocity. And they introduced this notion of PR cycle time, which is essentially the time from when a branch is opened to the PR is merged and deployed to production as the cycle time, which is kind of the hardest thing to measure. The other 3 metrics being deployment frequency and change failure rate and mean time to recovery, right? Once you have this one defined, the other 3 are not as complicated to define. And this was based on kind of using ticketing data, using pull request data. And this is kind of without sort of actually instrumenting your deployment process, you could actually approximate DORA metrics, which is actually a good first starting point if you actually don't have automated deployments completely in place, right? And then they have some second generation managerial reports. And this basically product category drew a whole explosion of competitors who were chasing that same model. Everyone wanted DORA metrics. It was easy to do. Products that were easy to build. There's a giant bunch of companies over there, right? And so this, if you look at sort of the software delivery metrics, this is a use case that pretty much everybody in the space now supports, right? The third use case started was when we get into developer productivity. And this came out with the SPACE framework. The SPACE framework in 2020 was the first time actually somebody came out and said, okay, well, we can measure developer productivity. And there was a paper in the ACM that talked about how to do it. I actually think it was a terrible mistake. I'm actually not a fan of that framework. But we have spent a lot of years talking about, well, you can't measure developer productivity. There are a bunch of reasons. Martin Fowler's articles. But they did it. They named Voldemort, and now you can actually measure developer productivity, and there's a way to do that, to say so in the SCM, right? It is people focused. It has 5 dimensions that they count as indicative characteristics of productivity: engineer satisfaction, performance metrics, activity, communication, and collaboration, and efficiency. At 3 organizational levels: individual, teams, and systems. They go all the way down to individual, right? And so this, on paper, it sounds like a very comprehensive framework, but the devil's in the details. The implementations are quite free to mix and match metrics within these categories. Inside the list, they basically have options that even include things like lines of code if you want to put it in there. So it's like it kind of is a hash, but it did bring structure to the metric software delivery platforms, because people had a bunch of metrics and there was no standard way to sort of think about how to deliver them to people. They gave them a structure, called it developer productivity, and a whole category of, okay, here's how you measure developer productivity tools is born. So now if you ask somebody, how do you measure developer productivity? Well, the answer is buy a product that does space framework. They'll give you these metrics. You can configure a few of them, plug it in, and you'll have your developer productivity measures. I think it's terrible, right? And really, no one noticed that this is terrible until McKinsey took the same idea and said, okay, yes, you can measure developer productivity. And then everyone was up in arms because the wrong people were saying that. I don't know for sure, right? I think the whole controversy is completely bogus, right? There is a clear, so the answer is, yeah, if you want to measure developer productivity, there's a way now. Everyone says it's a standard way. I think it's a terrible answer, right? But every product in the market supports it. So this is the 3rd use case, measuring developer productivity, right?
Oh, wait. So just to go back, so people may not be aware, but the space framework came out as an article in, I think it was a January 2020.
Yeah, the ACM, yeah, it's in the ACMQ, yeah.
Of the ACM, communication, the ACM.
Yeah, so it's got great credentials. I mean, it's highly pedigreed, but it's got everything wrong about measuring productivity that you can think of. Goodhart's law plays completely into place. No one's thought about that. You can blend psychometric measures as a overall construct. The matrix that you assemble, and I've seen matrix assembled for this, they're completely incoherent. And whatever you measure, supposedly somehow it's going to tell you that this is developer productivity. It's I don't get me started. This one is it's, I think, a huge miss. But we don't really go back and reassess these things in our industry, so it is what it is. I don't recommend anybody use it. I don't recommend you measure productivity this way at all. Use DORA, actually do the work to make your team productive, and then measure the outcomes for that. This is not the right way to do it. That's my opinion.
So one of the authors of Accelerate also, I think, was the director of the DORA, and also the co-author of the space article. So there's a thread between those 3.
Absolutely. And I know what I'm saying here, right? So, I just think that the space article was a misfire, right? Because, the same authors went back and did a better version called 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗚𝗥𝗔𝗠, so we'll talk about it in a second, which is actually much more acceptable, right? I just think this is a bug fix for something, and the bug fix is rolled out too quickly. Unfortunately, it made its way into production, and now it's out in the wild. So it's going to take years for us to unwind it, if ever. Anyway, I mean, if you use the space metric to measure developer productivity, you'll get what you do. I mean, we can always find that out, right? So it's not going to stop people from using it. It's out there right now. So I just think it's a bad idea.
Oh, this next generation is also an article in the ACM from a fairly recent edition, last October, was it?
Yep. So, and that fixes most of the problems here, right? Because it actually focuses on developer experience. Terminology matters, right? It does not call it productivity, right? They're basically saying focus on the things that help engineers focus and get their job done, and measure those factors, and measure what is preventing them from doing that. And that might lead to a more productive, I think it probably does, but that's a good way to measure things. It's just that as a measurement framework, space is incoherent, right? It's just, and it, anyway, this is, yeah, I know what I'm criticizing here. And I know that, this is definitely my opinion on the matter, right? Okay, but we have, because this had the blessing of a lot of influential and respected people. This is mainstream now. People are going to be measuring it. You will see space cited as the way to measure developer productivity. I'm like, yeah, go ahead and do it. It's irrelevant, right? It's not going to do any good. It's not going to do any bad. It's just like, spend your time. That's up to you, right? It has no signal value in terms of what it takes to improve productivity. And I see most people implementing them in kind of really strange ways. So if you don't think too hard about it, you can put a bunch of numbers together and call it productivity and make everybody happy. That's the way I look at it, right? Right. DX is the next one on the list, right? DX is basically I would say the fixed version. So DX is the use case that they came out to solve was developer experience survey. So space required both a combination of perceptual survey-based data as well as system log data, typically outputs, pull requests, and so on and so forth. That's the part of the matrix. Generally, the folks in the market who are doing this, the engineering intelligence platforms are basically all log-based, so they analyze systems logs to get their data. And DX basically was the first product that came out of the market that actually created really rigorous developer experience surveys, right? And targeting engineering enablement teams and CTOs, like purely perceptual measure of developer experience across the team. Hugely valuable thing to do, right? Hugely important, and well-designed, well-focused. And actually collecting feedback, perceptual feedback using rigorous surveys is actually very hard, right? It's not easy to actually get a good survey that is statistically valid, and it's not easy to roll it out to a whole bunch of people, get responses collected. They made a product which is really slick, and a really good user experience to get this done. Hugely valuable for a lot of people, hugely popular, doing well as they well should. And they also have a slightly more narrower and like this is what I'm saying. The details matter, right? The DevOps framework is a slightly slimmed down version, but they changed what the focus was, and they changed the metrics that they're measuring, and all of a sudden a bad thing became very good, right? It's a bug fix, right? That's the way I look at it, right? The DX folks are also very much of the opinion that most of this logs data is useless, cannot give you useful value, and so their aim is to disrupt the SEI market by replacing almost everything that comes from systems log with perceptual measures. I don't know if that's their aim or not. That's the impression I get when I read their marketing and the people talking, right? But then, most of the SEI competitors are fighting back. They've all introduced surveys now. So this is developer experience surveys are, part of every product in the market now. So again, I don't know how good those surveys are compared to what DX offers. I don't know how good their rollout strategies are and so on and so forth. But as a check the box item, surveys are not hard to duplicate. So, so it's going to be the idea of using perceptual data along with logs data is now becoming mainstream, and that's an awesome thing, right? That's a great thing to do, right? This is the third use case. So have you kept track of the use cases yet? Developer productivity, engineering manager reports, software and mid-delivery metrics, developer experience surveys, right? This is pretty much the surface of the use cases in the space, right? Almost every product you look at will support all four of these in different ways. There are different configurations and so on and so forth, right? The interesting development that came in recently is Apache 𝗣𝗥𝗦𝗦𝗢𝗥, which is an open source version of the logs-based tools. I think this is going to really disrupt the market because really no frills open source SCI platform. Apache license, anybody can use it. Has an open database schema. You can customize it any way you want. It implements all the standard code. This is the grunt work. I've built this stuff several times, and it's real grunt work, right? To connect to all the systems, do the integrations of the APIs, build the configuration layer, runs on-prem or in cloud. I really think this is going to be a disruptor for pretty much this whole market. Because a lot of people are just going to do this themselves and customize it, because most of the fully featured SaaS products are relatively limited because they're designed to work the same way for a lot of people. So we'll see. I think this is a really interesting development in this space.
So can I just question something there?
Yeah.
It sounds to me like taking an open source product and taking and making it your own and supporting it and applying it is taking away from productivity. Maybe I'm missing.
Well, it's a good question. So if you're really interested in kind of the out of the box metrics, and a SaaS tool can provide it for you, right? And you can actually pay the money. Yeah, absolutely. Use the off the shelf tools from the market, right? But a lot of these things are, when you actually get down to the details, a lot of these things have things that you really want to customize. You really want to sort of look at different metrics with different sort of queries and so on and so forth, right? And when those limitations when you run into those limitations, the SaaS tools don't give you anything, right? So yeah, definitely. And it's any kind of tool like this, if you buy it off, buy it, pay the license fee for it, and it works for you, and you can afford it, yeah, absolutely. Why take away from engineering time to actually do this other crap? For sure, right?
If there was something you had to have that you couldn't get, then I can see it. But otherwise, you're distracting your team, or at least it's part of the team.
And I think some many people have engineering enablement teams now, so they have the ability to do that. But on the other hand, you can argue that if they have an engineering enablement team, maybe they can afford to buy the SaaS tool too. I don't know. I'm just saying it's an option. A lot of people get to use this. It's very active. A lot of people are downloading it. DORA metrics, bottom up adoption of DORA metrics, actually measuring it the way engineers want to measure it, happens much more because of this, and I think it's a positive addition. Right. I'll also just mention overall, there is a tool called Actionable Agile, which is actually like KBAR 2015. It's an honorable mention that really is team level flow metrics and forecasting. It's a very simple tool, right? If you want to improve software development performance, sometimes it's the simplest way, is the best way to do it. Implement a rigorous Kanban process, and actually do sort of stabilization of your workflows. And you can use very rigorous metrics based on flow principles here. At the team level, I know a lot of really productive teams that do nothing more than this, and they're able to get tons of stuff done without any of this fancy tools. So if you actually are the discipline to understand flow and how to sort of manage your process, sometimes something simple like this is all you need, right? A lot of this other stuff becomes necessarily because engineering managers don't understand how engineers work. And they want to sort of get the latest sort of tools from the market, what are the latest fads, and thinking that it'll help them, right? If the engineers themselves take ownership of this stuff, you can actually do this with very, very simple techniques. All right, finally, Jellyfish, the last use case. This is actually the market leaders. You might wonder why I came to them last. They totally lead the market, but their use case is very different. They started out by doing R&D expense capitalization. A problem that VPs of engineering and CFOs hate, right? Figuring out how to do CapEx and OpEx budgeting, cost allocations across where engineers work. They built a really good use case, really good interface with an audit-ready process, tool set for R&D capitalizations, and the CFOs bought it, right? The CFOs are the ones closest to the money. They capture the budget for the engineering management platforms. And then, they have a huge presence, and then they methodically went downstream from there. They started building the other pieces, as part of the same package. And I think they have the most credible claim for being an engineering management platform right now, right? They actually solve all they're a formidable competitor. They're a fast follower. Despite late entry, they are definitely the leader in the space. And I think almost all viable competitors, again, have to support R&D capitalization if they want to get anywhere near where these guys are. So the feature sets are all converging. Everybody's copying everybody else because they're all competing for the same budget. So it's definitely a very saturated space. A lot of products, all of them have similar features. Definitely in a kind of interesting space to be, but I think a lot of these will shake out very quickly in the next few years. There'll only be 2 or 3 people left standing, if that. I'll also mention one other product which you might have not heard of, which I think is a very important addition in this space, which is CodeScene, right? And their use case is technical debt prioritization, right? Mickey, you might want to try and see if Adam will do a talk. I can get you in touch with him, right? CodeScene is a really unique product, and I think that you guys will really enjoy seeing them. What it does is it combines traditional static analysis of code with behavioral analysis. And the idea is that you understand what parts of code are actually churning a lot, right? Figure out the intersection of those parts with the code that needs the work from terms of some poor static analysis results. And you can actually prioritize the most important things that you need to reduce technical debt on. It's a powerful product, right? Unique approach they've been doing since 2017. Nobody seems to be interested in copying them, so they're great, right? It really remains the only part of its kind, as far as I know. There may be other copies, but they also have some really proprietary code analysis technologies that they are now actually powering some non-trivial AI use cases as well, right? So this is some deep stuff. I mean, Adam Thornhill is a genius and he's done some really great work. And so I can reach out to him and see if he'll do a talk to you guys on CodeScene, because I think you'll really enjoy that product. It's a really interesting product. It's really, and I think this is really the productivity kind of stuff that we should be thinking about. How do you actually get insights, instead of looking at tickets and pull requests and stuff like that, how do you actually get insights into how we can actually, non-trivial insights into where this giant code base that we're working with needs to be worked on, right? Things that you can't see just by inspection. And I think these are some unique products, I think, that do that. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Hey, I have some questions. Is this the end of your slide, or
no? I have several more to
okay.
go. Yeah.
Okay. I can wait. It's okay. Not about this. It's not about this. Yeah, but I have generic question. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, hi. I have a question. Generally, these processes, just to put in context, at what point of time in the development organization, like if it is a large scale enterprise situation, then do they put these immediately as soon as they are researched, and or it is more like growing case?
There's a huge difference in markets. Most of these tools have free tiers for like 10, 20 developers. So you can actually just go download them and plug them in and try them out. It's not hard, right? I think that if you're going to do things like R&D expense capitalization, obviously you must be bigger, and then there's some need for that. But these tools get used in teams of, since I built my own, I mean, I use it even with a team of 3. It's actually very useful, right? These tools are actually give you really good insights into how people are working. Even your own work, if you actually examine your own history and stuff like that, you actually see lots of feedback, right? It can have value at even the smallest teams, 3, 4, 5 people can get value to it. But I think that overall in this market, the products are so bloated now that it's hard to see kind of exactly what use case you need, which is why I talked about these use cases. Every product has every use case. And so you get this giant product of, if they could unbundle things and offer things at different price points, I think it'll make it easier, but maybe the market will force that. I don't know. It hasn't happened yet, right? Right now, everyone is looking for the same price point, $39 per developer per month. Everyone has the same feature set, and eventually something has to give. So I don't see that this is sustainable, right? But yeah, you can roll this out to teams of thousands of developers. That's what obviously the SaaS people would like, because those are really lucrative accounts. So. And one other thing I want to talk about is the Pluralsight Developer Success Lab, which is, I think, a completely different thing. There's been a lot of interest in developer productivity from sort of technical standpoints, but the actual social, emotional behavior of engineers, how do you actually sort of take psychometric research on developer productivity and actually formalize it in systematic ways? And Dr. Kat Hicks at the Pluralsight runs a Pluralsight Developer Success Lab at Pluralsight. They do a lot of deep research. A great place to go and check out papers if you want to understand how this work is proceeding. So far, it seems like most of that work is very theoretical. I don't know how it manifests in a customer-facing product yet, but they are part of the same company that bought you GitPrime. They're part of Pluralsight, right? So in a sense, bookends, these guys did some terrible metrics back then. The same company is actually sort of responsible for doing some really cutting edge, really subtle research really rigorously researched, methodologically very rigorous, I'll say, right? And so this is a trend I think that we need to sort of see more of, which is not just rely on tools and tool visibility. It's a huge part, it's a huge component of how to do the work, right? But also to sort of mix the human element and sort of do metrics that are based on sort of understanding who your people are and how to sort of see surface insights of how that works using tools from psychology and other places. So
it wasn't clear to me that this wasn't more motivated by the plural side business, which is learning programs.
It could very well be. It could very well be. I mean, the Pluralsight is a very interesting company. They have this, really interesting portfolio of education, performance. It could very well. I have no idea what the motivations are. I do know that they're doing some really great work over there. I mean, I every time I see their papers, I think I really get a lot. And I don't know this stuff. I'm not an expert in the social psychology work, and I get a lot of for a layman, it gives me a lot of insights. And I think I really sort of think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, I last tracked it about a year ago, so I had to look back at it.
Yeah, they're doing some great work. So, all right, so that's our sort of first half of it, right? Almost done. The first quarter of it, right? The current SEI market overall observations. People are generally focused on measuring lagging metrics, putting stuff up on reporting dashboards. Tremendous marketing. Go through the marketing material very carefully, understand the use cases before you sort of, and really see which ones matter to you. Everyone claims to do everything, but not obviously everyone does everything with the same well, right? The feature set is converging. This is the 5-6 use cases I talked about. Everyone is doing the same thing, right? And most of these tools are toolboxes of use cases. You have one module that does this, one module that does this. As a platform, I'm not sure what that means. Maybe these are all the things we need for software engineering intelligence, but what about a code scene? How does that fit in there, right? So I think that there's need for a platform, and the other two things that I don't see anybody doing is really causal modeling. Okay, so you have pull request cycle time. Do you know why the pull request cycle time is the way it is? What are the sort of secondary and tertiary metrics, input metrics that lead to that cycle time? There's nothing, right? I mean, nobody even talks about that at all, right? And if you want to improve, you don't measure those secondary metrics, you're not going to make any progress, right? So I think that this is, there are a lot of sort of structural. The market is relatively unsophisticated. People want metrics. People don't really think about how do I use the metrics to actually improve. So it's in a weird state. Maybe this is still early, and the customer base needs to get more sophisticated. But this is where we are right now, right? And the other problem is that you can't really support continuous improvement. Everyone says, okay, well, if I have metrics, I should be able to improve. No, actually, that's not true, right? Your metrics have to have some degree of signal that is not masked by noise, and almost all these metrics are completely noisy, right? So you're trying to improve noise, right? Which is ridiculous, right? So until you can actually narrow these top level metrics, the PR cycle time for a team is a hugely noisy metric. It's an emergent metric for a bunch of people doing work in completely variable ways, right? And you cannot sort of just take that and sort of reduce it by 30% and say, I reduce it by 30%. You might have 30% of noise on any given day, right? So not being able to support the difference between signal and noise is like a fundamental problem with almost all these tools. So the thing to remember is that measurement is not the same as improvement, right? I don't think this message actually gets across anywhere in this industry, right? Just because you measure something doesn't mean you can actually improve it, right? In this picture, you use your standard metrics, your DORA metrics, and this car should be going like at 90 miles per hour. The actual metric that matters is sheep density. How many sheep are there per square foot on this road, right? If you don't see this number, you're actually not going to be able to understand why a car is not moving, right? This is the fundamental problem, right? So we measure these metrics at high level and say, okay, well, you just measure them and people will look at these metrics and somehow we'll get improvement, right? It doesn't work that way. You have to do a lot more work, starting with your first measurement, to actually build a system that actually can improve stuff, right? And that rigor is not even close to being anywhere near mainstream in our system. And that really kills us, particularly because we actually end up focusing on engineering myopically, right? You should be not looking just as engineering, If you look at the value stream outside of engineering, this is your box. This is developer output. This is what we're optimizing, productivity, right? This is the only thing we're looking at. But there's a whole world outside engineering that's actually causing the sheep are coming in, right? That are causing these things to completely bog down. And unless you measure the whole value stream, you're not going to be able to understand what your true productivity is, because productivity doesn't happen in engineering. Productivity happens when your stuff that you're building gets to the market, gets used by customers, and they actually pay you for it, right? And if you're not looking at all this stuff, all you're doing is measuring, little widgets that people are producing in some way or the other. Value stream is where the real productivity definition needs to live, right? Which is why this is the argument that you'll see why people talk about value streams and value stream management as a real problem that we should be solving instead of myopically focusing on developer productivity, right? That's part 2, right? So we'll get through that quickly, right? What is the value stream? So if you want to think about value stream, engineering is part of a larger organization, right? I might have product management, engineering, and operations. These are functions, right? They're not value streams because they don't start and end with the customer, right? So you basically have to sort of move this up to a point where you can say, okay, when is it that the work I'm doing actually originates and/or ends with the customer, and it actually delivering a business capability along with the people, processes, and technologies that fulfill some kind of value proposition, right? So for instance, product development is a value stream, right? Marketing is a value stream. Engineering is not a value stream, right? But on the other hand, you can also sort of take, if it's hard enough to measure the productivity of engineering, it's even harder to measure the productivity of product management, right? So product development as a whole, so what you do is, you actually sort of broaden the functional organizational scope, but narrow the value propositions, right? So you narrow the scope of the outcomes to a specific value proposition, and you actually trace it through the entire path from customer request to customer delivery, right? And that's what you get that's what you call a value stream, right? And this actually allows you to take outcomes, real values, real business outcomes, money, profits, and so on and so forth, and allocate it to the work and money you put into doing the work, right? It's a missing element because these outcomes lag the actual work. I might do some work today, but it actually produces an outcome a year and a half from today, right? How do you track that, right? A value stream lets you do that, right? Because it's long-lived. It's a concept that tracks incremental work over time, hugely useful, hugely important, very much in use in the large enterprises because they understand this problem better. Completely ignored in our tech space. People talk about value streams, but it's not really used. It's not considered fashionable, I guess, because the enterprise guys use it. Nothing the enterprise guys use can possibly be good enough for our tech guys, right? It actually is a very bad idea because value streams actually are a very useful concept, and we should be sort of importing them into core technical businesses and learning how to use them because the techniques are actually coming to life now, right? And tools are coming to life. There's a whole market that's coming to life over there. To me, I think value stream management is where the real developer productivity is a distraction. It's a waste of time trying to measure developer productivity, improve developer productivity, but don't bother measuring it. Improve value streams. There's a lot of work for that. There's a lot of measurement you can do that. There you can do that. And that's where you should be focusing our attention, right? And the way to think about this, generically is with this idea called value stream networks. It's a well-defined construct. What you do is take one of these narrow slices and you actually trace investments through the life cycle of that slice. So you start with an idea that you're exploring, you get traction, you start investing in to grow it. And at this point, you're sort of still investing in it. You might be getting some value back. You're definitely giving value to customers, but you may not be getting as much value back. At some point, if this is software, it should transition to the point where it's actually generating more value than the money you're putting in. And this is software. It should be running much more than you're actually implementing it, right? If you're here, you're operating a consulting business, right? You're putting $1 in and you get $1 back, right? But here you're operating a product, right? The only time you actually get to a product economics is when you're actually in this extract phase. Ken Beck was the originator of this particular framework, explore, expand, extract. But there's a whole bunch of other horizon frameworks that you can use. You can actually build a strategy around where this is a Wadley map, and then you can build a strategy around where your value streams are, because for every value stream, you know exactly what resources are in play at what time point in time, what port bases are in play. You can actually construct all this data from your systems these days, right? And you can actually understand the dependencies. Do these two things share resources? Is there a core conflict between these resources? Do I need to be investing in this versus this? Which one has more value? Trying to get it from here. What is the cost of delay for taking this guy and leaving it here versus moving it here, right? All these things we can actually sort of measure, right? And this becomes a value stream network, becomes your strategic framework to understand where product investment decisions go. And people are starting to do this. It's very early still, right? The tools are primitive. Not everything gets anywhere near this, near the thing. But they really force you to sort of focus on investments, your product and technical decision quality instead of output when assessing productivity, because your goal is a productive value stream, right? So productivity should be defined in how many value streams that you make productive over 2 quarters or 3 quarters, right? And for this, the value propositions have to be granular enough. You're not going to do this if your product is Google search. That's not enough, right? It may be a smaller product that you're going to add to Google search, and that's how you sort of do that discussion, right? But because we can connect work to the outcomes, yeah.
Yeah, Krishna, is there an example you can give for the invisible and visible items here? The pink and the blue?
So yeah, visible. So basically the idea is that a supporting value stream is could be most of the things that start and end with the customers themselves are going to be in the visible value streams, right? So these are capabilities. They may be sort of new areas of the market you're trying to explore. You build growth by adding a new capability that will grow revenue over time. Each of these would be a visible value stream. It's supposed to last it's not a week or 2 or a month, right? It's really something that drives incremental revenue that will move your business in a fundamentally new direction, right? It's long-lived, but not infinitely lived. It has a finite lifetime. And if it's not farming, you kill it. You take the resources and move it somewhere else, right? So this could be a capability. If it's in some cases it could even be a feature, but I don't think it's a good idea to do the value streams at that level, right? These are supporting infrastructure teams, infrastructure tools. They may be sort of core supporting components that are being used by the team. So you may start with a team builds a throwaway product, right? Doing experimentation, but they keep a bit of infrastructure. And then this thing moves to the other side, starts to expand, the infrastructure hasn't moved along with it. We've seen this all the time, right? So you can actually sort of see those dependencies and where things are and where you need to invest very quickly and visually, in a value stream network. And then you can actually connect it to your data and get the data to actually reason about it. So I'm totally excited about the idea of value stream networks, because it actually gives you a really sort of formal, rational, methodical way of being able to think about how does the work that I do today contribute to the business? Where have I done contribution? Which is really the missing element when people talk about productivity. It's really about what's the money I'm spending to engineering giving us. You can't tell that today. You can't tell that in the day, but cumulatively over time you can. So if I have a team that has a track record of creating productive value streams, which is the way most successful companies think, yeah, these guys are responsible for the core product. They are actually part of the core value stream, right? And the other people are doing experimentations. You want to figure out when to kill these experiments when they go too long. When you don't have the ability to sort of look across your portfolio of value streams, it becomes hard to do that. And so the value stream network is a really sort of formal, structured way of being able to actually think about this, reason about it, collect data, figure out where to improve, drive improvement opportunities, and so on and so forth. So to me, this is really exciting, right? And there are some platforms out there to do this. This is a very early space. Most of the current platforms are very, 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 very primitive, mostly focused on doing some, reporting and analytics on value stream data. But this is where, in my mind, this is where the action is. This is where in the next 3-4 years, when everybody gets tired of the developer productivity crap that's out there, we'll actually be focusing on this, right? So in the enterprise, so this is very popular in the enterprise, because in the enterprise, these problems are much more visible, right? People see that there's hundreds of millions of dollars going to waste because of waste in the value stream. And they're trying to digitize their old school processes and so on and so forth. So this is very popular, very sort of prevalent in the industry right now, right? In the enterprise space. But these products are designed for, multi-million-dollar sales with huge consulting contracts and so on and so forth. They're not a good fit for most software companies that are mid-sized, even smaller, bigger enterprises. Just culturally, it's a different game, right? I think that to me that there is a missing element. People don't. First of all, they don't think in value stream terms in the general sort of modern tech businesses. And then the products themselves lead, in very sort of enterprisey ways. So I think it'll take a while for this model to actually make its way down to the point where we use it. But there's lots of opportunities. I'm thinking of making a fourth run at this, and I might actually do a product to see if I can get something interesting that is small and lightweight in this space. But who knows? Quickly, I don't think we need to get into too much detail about this space, because if you're interested, I can always share my presentation with you. But the book that really sort of launched this as a category was Mick Kirsten's Project to Product. He explained kind of the idea of why value streams have been there since probably the 40s or 50s in the industrial manufacturing section. It wasn't very properly in the digital world. Mick Kirsten's book, he also introduced a flow framework, which is an operational way of actually implementing value stream management. He defined the concept of value stream networks. Hugely influential thinker. But largely these ideas and the products themselves are still kind of very, very, I'd probably say 10% of the ideas are actually implemented. But that doesn't prevent people from selling it and getting started, right? Largely confined to the large non-tech enterprises using digital transformation. And the problems on the surface seem very different because they are slower moving, things take a long time to get done. But the underlying problems are exactly the same. Value stream invisibility is an issue every software company. And fixing this is probably the fastest way we can actually, in addition to DORA, DevOps, and all those things, to actually sort of make real productivity happen, right? AI is going to change a lot of this stuff too, for sure, right? But a lot of the data you need to collect AI to understand where work is happening is actually in your value stream. So I'm sure there's going to be some companies out there that are going to be doing value stream management connected with AI as sort of transformations. I'm sure they'll come through. We'll see how that works. And the VSMC, the Value Stream Management Consortium, is a group that actually does. It's a membership-based community that's really sort of quite welcoming, quite a good group of people there, understanding how to use value stream analysis and modeling to drive improvement programs. Easy to join there's a membership fee to pay, but there's a lot of material there that is quite useful if you're interested in the space. And there's also a great book by 𝗣𝗥𝗡𝗦𝗜 that's coming out, Flow Engineering. It's actually released next week, I think. Value stream management is always very closely tied to sort of industrial methods and so on and so forth. There's this kind of a smell of, this is manufacturing. Steve's written a really sort of great book that demystifies all this stuff and puts in a very software-centric context. Stuff you can do with our tools. This is what, if I want to recommend a book for you to understand value stream management and actually use it in your work, this is the book. Get it when it comes out next week. Both Steve and Andrew are excellent leaders in this space, and I think worth listening to them. So finally, there's another book if you want to read a book called The Flow System. It's by Nigel Thurlow and his co-authors. This is if this stuff can be implemented today, this stuff is probably a few more years in the future, but theoretically, this is where the action is. This is what we have to solve, which is understand how to do management of this kind of work in the presence of complexity, which is, a group of human beings is a complex adaptive system. And none of the assumptions that you make in terms of, how workflows and stuff like that can sort of assume that it's like deterministic, right? So the biggest criticism of a lot of the work that you see in this flow community is that, well, you guys are just borrowing stuff from manufacturing. There's an element of truth to that, right? The missing element is when you have to deal with complexity, the way you actually tackle improvement. Measurement is probably the same way, but the way you tackle improvement is very, very different, right? And because of that, you have to understand complexities, complex systems. Dave Snowden's work is very useful for that. Interestingly, the Toyota production system is still useful in terms of philosophy, right? But also think about things like distributed leadership, team science, and so on and so forth, right? Which are all about building cohesive teams as opposed to building just mechanical systems. These are sort of socio-technical, kind of cybernetic systems, right? And you have to treat them as such to actually manage them well. Much of what happens in the engineering world right now is still very still very mechanical, right? People are still using very mechanistic approaches to do this. So my recommendation is, if you want to learn more about value stream management, understand about the principles behind how to create flow in large organizations, these are 2 books I think will be very, very useful, right? Final thoughts. The SCI category, in my opinion, is unsustainable. You'll see a shakeout, or it'll be absorbed in other platforms. Open source solutions will come into play. One or two players will be left standing. Maybe there are a bunch of niche players might be there. I don't know for sure, right? VSM will be a standalone category. It's really going to grow in the next few years because there's a lot of interest. People are still figuring out a lot of things. It's very early in the game. Current VSM solutions are expensive, lots of consulting. It's unnecessarily bulky, I think. There's definitely an opportunity for a lighter weight product here that'll be much cheaper and can really disrupt that space. And in general, pretty much everything in the current market is focused on measurement, very little support for improvement. I think that has to change. Maybe it has to change. I don't know. If you're not really interested in improving, why are you measuring? I don't know for sure. But sometimes it's hard to tell why people buy stuff, so it's very unclear. That's it. That's my talk.
Krishna, one last question on that previous slide. I believe that it's been a couple of years since I touched base on it, but Gartner actually has 2 analysts focusing on that whole value stream area.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
So that's just showing that there's a there, although it's not there yet.
Yeah, I mean, like with all these things, I mean, this is a 10-year vision, I think, but people market it like it's all available today. It's not, right? I mean, it's probably about 5% there, right? When people talk about this grand vision, the tools are still very primitive, they're clunky, but they still sell them for millions of dollars. So somebody must be buying something, I don't know. It's interesting. But
So we're approaching being out of time. We have a few minutes for questions. If anyone has some questions, floor is open.
Yeah, sure. I can ask one about, so it seems like this productivity is more towards a business issue, rather than thinking more about engineering issue, or I may be wrong, but yeah.
No, Chandra, what I would say is that engineering productivity is important, right? But we know how to increase engineering productivity. Look at the practices, right? The difference is, should you spend your time running a bunch of metrics to measure productivity, or should you just focus on understanding what you need to do to implement? Because those metrics don't have diagnostic value, right? It's not that productivity is not important. It is hugely important. But most of the time, if you look at the DORA research, they've identified the factors, right, that you got to do. How you sort of your branching strategies, how you do continuous integration, how you do testing, how you do improving. If you do all those things, then productivity will go up, right? You'll actually deliver more software, right? But then the problem starts, okay, I'm delivering more software. What does it mean to the business? Just because I deliver more software doesn't mean anything, right? Which is why you got to go up the value stream to understand, okay, well, how does engineering connect with all this thing? How do you connect with your finances? How do you connect with budgeting and so on and so forth, right? So it's not that productivity is not important. Measuring productivity is not important. That's my point.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love the value stream aspect of things. I think I come from Pivotal Labs, so we had a very opinionated way, and we never used any of these, developer productivity tools. We were mostly sticking on to the agile practices. I've always, when I've handled big products, I've always felt that, we have so many metrics and we have so many problems. Like, who's going to solve these things? And the problem is addressing those things. Like, I don't want more, I don't want to find out more to, clear out more. It's just so much. But the value stream is very nice.
Can I say one thing? Which, if you look at what DX does, DX is exactly this. They say, you want to measure what to fix, go ask your developers. They'll tell you what you need to fix, right? Let's go fix that.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. So it's, we have big problems to solve before we get on to, we're mostly good but now we have to find out who are the not so good developers, right? Like I think pick your battle, right? So that's the way I went about it. Yeah, but then the value stream, right? I'm liking that idea, but I don't know if in today's world, how cooperative are all those departments, right? Like it's to get all those data, like like you have to get they're all very secretive about like to get that data from finance is going to be like super hard, and is this going to be a visible board to everyone, or is it just like the leaders get to see it? Or I'm definitely interested when if there is something to try out, and how people are organizing themselves to get all this data.
It is a tremendously difficult job in most places. This is why, especially in the large enterprises, people have much harder time doing this, right? I actually think it'll be much lower lift in smaller tech companies, because for them, the problem is that downstream work is already good. Most people are doing CI/CD, most people are doing DevOps. And the real bottleneck is in the productivity of the products that go through the pipeline themselves, right? It's not as hard to collect the data. And it's not so much the collecting of the data that matters, it's actually visualizing the value stream, figuring out who's involved, getting the picture of the network is much more important than collecting the gradual data, because nobody knows the big picture. Nobody knows who's connected to what needs to collect. Visualizing, mapping, modeling is much more important than collecting real-time metrics. Of course, everyone's focused on collecting real-time metrics as usual, right? But the mapping, modeling of the value stream, understanding the organizational pictures, understanding the collaboration networks, is mostly network analysis and stuff like that. That is really the core of value stream management today. But should be. It is not today. But someone has their hands raised. Oh, Igor, hi.
Yeah. Hey, Krishna. Thank you so much for sharing these insights today. Hey, Mickey. Good to see you. Krishna, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on DORA. You kind of like mentioned that we're measuring productivity through DORA, and henceforth.
No.
Okay.
No, we're not measuring productivity through DORA. So if you look at the DORA metrics, what they're intended for, right? I don't like the fact that they put those benchmark kind of things in there, right? But the goal of the DORA clusters, they were the clusters that showed up in terms of here's how high performers perform. There's a group of people that have these kinds of metric characteristics and so on and so forth. Yeah. The goal of using that, the way to measure DORA metrics is go take the survey, right? Go look at the DORA website. They have it'll take you, if you have a rough idea what the data is. You don't have to be precise. You just need to know, are you deploying multiple times a day or once a week? That's hard. That's easy to tell, right? You just get the DORA survey, figure out where you fall in those clusters, and then go look and see, all right, if I'm in this bucket, what do I need to be worried about? It's probably because if you're deploying, it's easier. If you're deploying once a month, right, you probably have some kind of large batch process. You don't have deployment pipelines. You know what you need. You know what you need to do. If you want to deploy from twice a week, from once a month, there's a whole set of technical things you have to do. And the DORA website just lists those out, right? And they've validated through research that these are the things that actually work. So if your engineers come back and say, well, this won't work here, you can actually have a conversation. Say, okay, well, why do you think it won't work, right? So it's that stuff that they've solved for us, right? So the metrics are not important. Metrics are your initial diagnostics. Now, once you start building a pipeline, you may actually want to measure it again to understand, okay, what's our real number, right? How long does it take that for changes?
DORA metrics don't measure productivity. They are a measure of CI/CD practice adoption. And the science behind them, if you actually dig into it, is purely survey-based. And so, in my view, they are useful in measuring your DevOps practices and should be used for that. But they got taken out of context, and people now assume that DORA metrics measure productivity when they don't. So to me, it almost looks like value stream mapping is more so perhaps a measure of outcomes, which is extremely important and should be done definitely. But it seems like we're forgetting about measuring output, because I think you got to measure both.
Oh no, so I think so. The idea is that if you streamline, so you want it is a given, right? If you're running an inefficient engineering organization, right, you're not going to get outputs, and it'll be reflected in your value stream, right? You're not going to get outcomes, so you don't get outputs without outcomes, right? You don't get outcomes without outputs.
Well, I disagree in a sense, because you could be achieving good business outcomes with a very poorly managed and poorly running engineering team, where there's no bottlenecks, but you're just working slowly. And so I think
It's
the value
fine.
mapping
You
approach.
move at the speed that you need to, right? So
And
if you
I think output measurements come in quicker than they give us some earlier insights. Maybe like outcomes probably take a little longer to understand because
they lag,
yeah.
Which
Yeah,
is why value streams are
measure
long-lived
both.
constructs, right? So they're long-lived constructs, and you have to periodically look at your value streams, figure out what your outcomes are. You can actually build OKRs around sort of smaller changes to the outcomes in the value stream. But the value stream is this container that has a life, right? And the outcomes happen over the life of the value stream, right? Instead of saying, how did the work I do today affect me this quarter, you can say, cumulatively, I moved my value stream a little bit, but over the life of this value stream, here's how much work I've done. You can do those two long-term, short-term decisions, which makes it's the missing ingredient. We don't think about this. This is the missing ingredient in how we sort of manage software, right? The long-livedness of software and the fact that software makes money when you're no longer putting money into it, right? That is the two insights that value streams that you do, which is very much missing from what is my quarterly ROI, quarterly sales, quarterly revenue. That's not the right metric for that,
Well, we've now exhausted the time we put aside. So unless anyone has a parting comment or question, I think we'll call it a night. Well, Krishna, I want to thank you for the effort you put into that, and hope everyone took a lot out of that. There's a lot of information there. I'm going to have to go back over to try to digest some of it myself, but I really appreciate the effort you put into it and come in and presenting for us tonight. And thank you all for coming.
Absolute pleasure. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions. I'm on LinkedIn. Happy to chat about this stuff anytime. And really, really thank you everybody for joining tonight.